What happens when a pilot's casual cruelty collides with a passenger's hidden power? On a crisp autumn morning, at one of the world's most exclusive private jet terminals, a decorated pilot, Captain Mark Thorne, decides to mock the accent of a black passenger. It's a single condescending remark, a sneer wrapped in a joke made moments before takeoff. But Thorne has no idea who he's talking to. He believes he is in his kingdom of steel and sky untouchable. He is wrong. He has just insulted Dr. Alistair Finch, a man whose reach extends far beyond the clouds, and in doing so has lit the fuse on a time bomb that will obliterate his career, his reputation, and his entire life. This isn't just a story of revenge, it's a story of consequence. The air at the Signature Aviation Terminal at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey had a unique scent, a sterile, expensive fusion of chilled air, freshly brewed coffee, and the faint, intoxicating perfume of jet fuel. This was not the chaotic scrum of Newark or JFK. This was the FBO, the fixed base operator, a gilded gateway for the 1%. Here time was the ultimate luxury, and discretion was the currency. Men in tailored suits and women in quiet luxury spoke in hushed tones, their faces illuminated by the glow of stock tickers on their phones. Into this hushed world walked Dr. Alistair Finch. He was a man who defied easy categorization. He stood 6'2", with a build that spoke of disciplined early morning workouts. He wore no ostentatious jewelry, no designer logos screamed from his clothing. Instead, he was clad in a simple, perfectly fitted cashmere sweater, dark trousers, and a pair of elegant but unassuming leather loafers. The only hint of significant wealth was the watch on his wrist, a Patek Philippe Calatrava, its slim profile a subtle nod to those who knew what they were looking at. His face was a study in calm intensity. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. When he spoke to the concierge, his voice was a deep, resonant baritone, carrying the weight of a complex history. There was the polish of a British education, King's College London, to be precise, layered over the gentle musical cadence of his Nigerian heritage. It was an accent that told a story of two worlds of a journey from Lagos to the pinnacles of global finance and technology. "Good morning," he said to the young woman at the desk. "Dr. Finch for the 7 o'clock charter to London Luton, Apex Air." "Of course, Dr. Finch," she replied, her smile professionally bright. "Captain Thorne is just finishing his pre-flight. We have coffee pastries and a quiet lounge for you if you'd like." "Thank you. I'm fine right here," he said, preferring to stand and watch the ballet of the ground crew on the tarmac. A sleek Gulfstream G650ER, its pearlescent white paint gleaming under the morning sun, was being prepped. Its tail bore the discreet, stylized eagle of Apex Air Charter, a boutique operator known for its impeccable service and experienced pilots. It was then that he saw him. Captain Mark Thorne strode from the aircraft towards the terminal with the unshakable confidence of a man who commands a $65 million machine. Thorne was in his late 40s with sandy blonde hair cropped short, in a style that was probably once military. His jaw was perpetually set in a look of mild annoyance, as if the world were a constant low-grade inconvenience. He was a pilot's pilot, technically brilliant, a veteran of 1,000 perfect landings, but possessed of an arrogance that festered just beneath his crisp white shirt and gold-striped epaulets. Thorne saw Dr. Finch standing by the window. He didn't see a tech mogul whose latest algorithm had just revolutionized renewable energy logistics. He didn't see a philanthropist whose foundation was building schools across West Africa. He saw a black man in a sweater. His mind, a cramped cockpit of prejudice, made a series of instant flawed calculations. New money, probably a rapper or an athlete. Got lucky. He walked past Finch without a flicker of acknowledgement and went straight to the concierge desk. "Is the passenger here?" Thorne asked, his voice unnecessarily loud. "Yes, Captain. Dr. Finch is right over there," the woman said, gesturing politely. Thorne turned his eyes, raking over Finch with a look that was part appraisal, part dismissal. He forced a thin, professional smile that didn't reach his cold, blue eyes. "Dr. Finch," he said, striding over. "Captain Thorne, we'll be ready for you in about 15 minutes. Just need to run through a quick safety briefing with you before we board." "Excellent, Captain." "Thank you," Finch replied, his voice calm and even. "No problem," Thorne clipped back. He was already annoyed. He had been hoping for a quick, unaccompanied cargo flight to London. Passengers, especially the nouveau riche types, were a hassle. They had demands. They touched things. They asked stupid questions. And in Thorne's biased worldview, this particular passenger was likely to be the most demanding of all. The seed of his own destruction had been planted, watered by a lifetime of casual bigotry, and it was beginning to sprout. 15 minutes later, a junior crew member escorted Dr. Finch to a small private briefing room just off the main lounge. The room was sterile and impersonal, furnished with 4 leather chairs and a large screen on the wall. Captain Thorne was already there, leaning against the wall, scrolling through his phone. He didn't stand when Finch entered. Beside him, looking distinctly uncomfortable, was the first officer, a younger man named David Chen. David had a kind, open face, and immediately stood offering a slight, respectful nod. "Dr. Finch, this is my first officer, David Chen," Thorne said, barely looking up from his screen. "He'll be assisting me today." "A pleasure, Dr. Finch," David said, his voice genuine. Finch shook his hand. "And you, Mr. Chen?" Thorne finally pocketed his phone with an audible sigh of impatience. "All right, let's get this over with. Standard stuff. Flight time to Luton will be approximately 6 hours and 30 minutes. We're expecting smooth air for the most part, maybe some light chop over the North Atlantic, nothing to worry about. The G650 is a rock." He gestured vaguely at a diagram of the aircraft on the screen. "Exits are here and here. In the highly unlikely event of a pressure loss, masks will drop from the panel above you. Pull the mask towards you to start the flow of oxygen. Place it over your nose and mouth and breathe normally." He was speaking in a bored, rapid-fire monotone, the words learned by rote and delivered without an ounce of sincerity. Finch listened patiently, his hands clasped behind his back. "The life vest is under your seat," Thorne continued. "Don't inflate it until you're outside the aircraft. The flight attendant will give you a more detailed briefing on the cabin amenities once we're airborne. Any questions?" It was a rhetorical question, delivered with the clear expectation of silence. But Dr. Finch had one. It was a simple, practical query. "Captain, given the headwinds you mentioned, will that affect our ability to maintain the planned arrival time? I have a rather time-sensitive meeting upon landing." Finch asked, his mixed accent as clear and precise as ever. The question was innocuous. The response was not. Thorne's face twisted into a smirk. He tilted his head, cupping an ear with his hand, in a gesture of exaggerated confusion. "Sorry, Chief, could you run that by me again?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. He slowed his own speech down to a crawl, adopting a mocking, rhythmic pattern. "That island, cadence, you've got, it's a little tough to follow when you're talking about headwinds." He chuckled, looking over at his first officer for support. You get that, Dave, time-sensitive. First Officer David Chen froze. His face paled, then flushed with a mixture of shock and embarrassment. He looked from his captain's smug face to Dr. Finch's, his eyes wide with apology. He wanted the floor to swallow him whole. The air in the room went from sterile to solid ice. Dr. Alistair Finch did not raise his voice. He did not lash out. He didn't even change his expression, at least not in a way a casual observer would notice. But something shifted. The ambient calm in his eyes hardened into something cold and dense, like polished obsidian. The quiet power he carried, usually held in reserve, was now focused with laser-like intensity on the man in the pilot's uniform. He held Thorne's gaze for a long, silent 3 seconds. In that silence, Thorne's smirk faltered slightly. He had expected a complaint, perhaps an indignant outburst that he could then dismiss as oversensitivity. He was not prepared for this unnerving, absolute stillness. Finally, Finch spoke. His voice was terrifyingly soft, stripped of any warmth or accent, leaving only the pure cutting edge of his King's College elocution. I said, he began enunciating each syllable with surgical precision, that I have a meeting of some consequence upon my arrival in London. I trust that your professional capabilities extend to understanding plain English, Captain. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. Or is there some other communication barrier we need to address before I entrust my life to your hands? The insult was returned sharper and 100 times more potent, wrapped in the language of competence and safety, a language a pilot could not ignore. Thorne's face darkened. He had been expertly dismantled. His petty mockery turned back on him as a question of his professional fitness. He was furious but cornered. To escalate now would be to admit fault. No, he gritted out through clenched teeth. No barrier. We'll be on time. Wonderful, Finch said, the single word landing like a gavel. He turned his back on Thorne and looked at David Chen, who still looked mortified. Mr. Chen, I look forward to a smooth flight. He then walked out of the briefing room without a backward glance, leaving a simmering Captain Thorne and a deeply troubled first officer in his wake. As he walked towards the gleaming Gulf Stream, Dr. Finch discreetly took out his phone. He didn't tap out an angry text or a complaint email. He opened a secure messaging app and sent a single coded message to a contact saved only as Sterling. The message read, Asset 77AP, pilot evaluation required, urgent. On the tarmac, the engines of the G650ER began to spool up with a low whine. For Captain Mark Thorne, it was the sound of the beginning of the end. He just didn't know it yet. The interior of the Gulfstream G650ER was the pinnacle of aviation luxury. The cabin was a symphony of cream leather-polished dark wood and brushed platinum fixtures. Sunlight streamed through the signature oval windows, illuminating a space that felt more like a penthouse suite than an aircraft fuselage. Dr. Finch settled into a wide, plush armchair and accepted a glass of still water from the flight attendant, a poised professional named Sarah, who was blissfully unaware of the drama that had unfolded in the briefing room. He opened his briefcase and took out a slim tablet, his focus immediately shifting to a series of complex financial projections. To anyone watching, he was the picture of a serene, focused businessman. But beneath the surface, a cold, calculated anger was churning. Finch was not a man given to petty grudges, but he had an absolute intolerance for prejudice, especially when it was paired with arrogance. Thorne's insult wasn't just offensive, it was a symptom of a deeper sickness, a casual rot of character that had no place in a high-stakes profession. A pilot who makes assumptions about a passenger's accent might also make assumptions about a warning light on the control panel. Arrogance bred complacency, and complacency in the cockpit was lethal. In the cockpit, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. First Officer David Chen went through his pre-flight checklist with meticulous, almost frantic precision. He avoided looking at Captain Thorne, focusing instead on the glowing panels and switches in front of him. Thorne, for his part, was stewing. His anger had curdled into a resentful justification. "Who the hell does this guy think he is?" he fumed internally. "Some jumped-up lottery winner talking down to me. Me, I've landed in crosswinds that would make a normal man cry for his mommy." He interpreted Finch's calm, cutting response not as a sign of disciplined strength, but as proof of his uppity nature. He was a man incapable of introspection, his ego a fortress that repelled all self-doubt. "Checklist complete, Captain," David said, his voice tight. "Fine," Thorne snapped. He keyed the mic. "Teterboro ground Apex 77 Alpha Papa, ready for taxi, runway 19. The G650 taxied smoothly, a predator of the skies, moving with unnatural grace on the ground. As they lined up on the runway, Thorne couldn't resist one last jab meant only for David's ears. "Better make sure we're on time," he muttered, a sneer in his voice. "The doctor has a very consequential meeting." David said nothing, his hands steady on the controls as Thorne pushed the throttles forward. The Rolls-Royce engines roared to life, pressing them back into their seats as the aircraft devoured the runway. Within seconds, they were airborne, climbing steeply into the blue expanse over New York City. For the next few hours, the flight was a study in contrasts. In the cabin, there was tranquility. Dr. Finch worked red and ate a light meal, all while being attended to by the seamless service of the flight attendant. He was polite and gracious to her, his earlier intensity completely masked. He made 2 more quiet phone calls, his voice never rising above a murmur. In the cockpit, there was a silent, simmering war. Thorne flew the plane with a rigid, aggressive precision, as if trying to prove his mastery over the machine, and by extension, the man in the back. David, meanwhile, felt like he was trapped in a pressure cooker. He was young, ambitious, and knew that his career was tied to the captain's reports. To challenge Thorne mid-flight was unthinkable, a cardinal sin in aviation hierarchy, but the captain's behavior had been unprofessional and vile, and David's conscience gnawed at him. He saw the SVS synthetic vision system, on the primary flight display a digital representation of the world outside, and wished he could be as detached as the graphics before him. Over the mid-Atlantic, Finch's phone buzzed discreetly. A new message from Sterling. It read, "Asset confirmed. Ownership traced. Stratus Global Aviation is the parent company. I am en route to Luton. ETA 1730 GMT. The board is watching." Finch read the message, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He typed a short reply, "Proceed." He then put the phone away and looked out the window at the endless carpet of clouds below. Stratos Global Aviation. The name was familiar. His private equity firm, Finch Capital, had acquired a 45% controlling stake in the conglomerate just 8 months ago. It was one of a dozen major acquisitions that year, a massive diversified portfolio of transportation and logistics assets. Apex Air Charter was a small, almost forgotten subsidiary in that vast empire, a minor jewel in a very large crown. Dr. Alistair Finch was not just a passenger on this flight. He was, for all intents and purposes, Captain Thorne's ultimate employer. Thorne, blissfully ignorant, was making a routine check-in with Shanwick Oceanic Control. Shanwick Apex 77 Alpha. Papa, position 51 north, 30 west, at 11:30 Zulu, flight level 410, Mach .85, estimate 51 north 40, west at 12 Zulu, next gander. He performed his duties flawlessly, a master of the technical, a failure at the human. He believed his skill in the air absolved him of all sins on the ground. He had never been more wrong. As the coast of Ireland appeared on the horizon, a shimmering green line separating the gray sea from the pale sky, the flight began its descent. The mood in the cockpit shifted slightly. The end of the tense journey was in sight. "Top of descent in 20 miles, David announced, relieved. "Notified." Thorne grunted. He was already thinking about his layover a pint at his favorite pub in London and putting this irritating passenger out of his mind. He began the slow, methodical descent towards London, guiding the $65 million jet through the increasingly crowded airspace. He was Captain Mark Thorne, commander of the skies, a man in total control. He was flying directly into the epicenter of his own ruin. London Luton Airport was overcast and gray, a typical English afternoon. The G650ER touched down with a gentle puff of smoke from its tires, a textbook landing that was Thorne's stock in trade. As he taxied towards the Signature Aviation FBO, a mirror image of the one they'd left in Teterboro, he felt a familiar sense of satisfaction. Another perfect flight. Another job well done. His earlier anger had faded, replaced by his usual baseline arrogance. "Chalk's on," the ground crew radioed. "Engines shutting down," Thorne confirmed, flipping a series of switches. The powerful whine of the Rolls-Royce engines spooled down into silence, leaving only the hum of the auxiliary power unit. "Well, let's go drop off our VIP," Thorne said to David, a hint of sarcasm still clinging to his words. He unbuckled his seatbelt, ready to give his curt professional farewell and be on his way. But as he looked out the cockpit window, he saw something unusual. Standing on the tarmac just beyond the spot where the ground crew was positioning the air stairs were two men in immaculate dark suits. They were standing beside a black Range Rover Sentinel that had been given clearance to drive right up to the aircraft. This was not standard procedure, not even for most high-net-worth individuals. One of the men was vaguely familiar, a face he'd seen in aviation trade magazines. The main cabin door hissed open, and the air stairs locked into place. Dr. Finch stood retrieving his briefcase. He nodded politely to the flight attendant. "Thank you, Sarah. The service was excellent." He walked to the front of the plane where Thorne and David were waiting by the open cockpit door. "Captain," Finch said, his tone neutral. "A smooth landing." "We aim to please, sir," Thorne replied, the fake deference grating. But Dr. Finch wasn't looking at him. His gaze was directed out the door at the two men on the tarmac. The older of the two men, a distinguished figure with silver hair and a sharp hawk-like nose, began walking towards the stairs. Thorne frowned. "Who the hell is that?" he muttered under his breath. The man in the suit reached the top of the stairs and stopped at the doorway, his presence immediately commanding the space. He ignored Thorne and David completely, his attention focused solely on Dr. Finch. "Alistair," the man said, his voice a low, powerful rumble. "Good flight." "Richard," Dr. Finch replied, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Productive. I trust everything is in order." "Everything is in order," the man Richard confirmed. Captain Thorne's brain finally engaged. He knew that face, he knew that voice. It was Richard Sterling, the formidable CEO of Stratus Global Aviation, the parent company of Apex Air Charter, the man who was effectively his boss's boss's boss. Thorne had met him once briefly at a company conference. What was he doing here? on the tarmac. Meeting this passenger, a cold dread, slick and oily, began to seep into Thorne's stomach. His mind raced, trying to connect the dots, but his ego was still fighting a desperate rearguard action. It's a coincidence. Sterling knows this guy from somewhere. A golf club, maybe. Richard Sterling finally turned his piercing gaze from Finch to the two pilots. He looked at David Chen's nervous face, then his eyes settled on Captain Mark Thorne. There was no warmth in them, only a chilling corporate finality. "Captain Thorne," Sterling said, his voice dangerously calm, "I'd like to introduce you to your passenger." He paused, letting the moment stretch, twisting the knife of suspense. "This is Dr. Alastair Finch. He's the founder and chairman of Finch Capital." Sterling let that title hang in the air for a second before delivering the killing blow. They acquired a controlling interest in Stratus Global 8 months ago, which makes him the primary shareholder of this company. And as of this moment, your boss. The world tilted on its axis for Mark Thorne. The hum of the APU seemed to grow deafeningly loud, then faded into a distant roar. The plush carpeting of the G650 suddenly felt like quicksand. He looked at Dr. Finch, truly looked at him for the first time. He didn't see a rapper or an athlete. He saw a man who owned the very air he was breathing, the very ground he was standing on. He saw a man who held his entire professional life in the palm of his hand. The condescending smirk about the island cadence, the mocking tone, the dismissive glances. Every moment of his petty, prejudiced behavior replayed in his mind, but now they were lit by the horrifying strobe light of revelation. Thorne's face, usually so ruddy with confidence, drained of all color. His jaw, normally set in a smug line, went slack. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. A dry, croaking sound was all he could manage. Dr. Finch watched him, his expression unchanged. He had not needed to raise his voice or issue a threat. He had simply allowed the truth to arrive. "Captain Thorne," Richard Sterling continued, his voice like chipping ice, "Dr. Finch filed a pilot evaluation report with me mid-flight, citing, and I quote, 'unprofessional conduct, gross prejudice, and behavior that calls into question the pilot's judgment and temperament for command.'" He took a step closer, invading Thorne's personal space. "You will not be flying the return leg. You will not be flying any leg. Hand your company ID and cockpit keys to First Officer Chen. You are grounded pending a full and immediate investigation. A car is waiting to take you to a hotel. You will be contacted by Human Resources tomorrow morning. Do you understand?" Thorne could only manage a weak, pathetic nod. His world had collapsed in the space of 30 seconds. David Chen, standing beside him, looked stunned, but also vindicated. He watched as Thorne, his hands trembling, fumbled to unclip his ID from his shirt. The gold-striped epaulets on his shoulders, once a symbol of his authority, now looked like a costume for a tragic play. He handed his keys and ID to David, refusing to meet his eyes or anyone else's. Dr. Finch gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to Richard Sterling. "Richard, please promote Mr. Chen to captain effective immediately pending his certification checks. He conducted himself with the utmost professionalism under difficult circumstances. And find out what his salary is. Double it." David's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Sir, Dr. Finch, Thank you." "You earned it, son," Sterling said gruffly before turning his attention back to the broken man before them. "Thorne, get off my aircraft." Without another word, Mark Thorne, the once arrogant captain, stumbled past them and down the air stairs, a ghost in a pilot's uniform. He walked across the tarmac, not to the gleaming Range Rover, but to a simple black sedan parked in the distance. He didn't look back. As the sedan pulled away, he caught one last glimpse of the G650ER, a monument to a life he had just spectacularly destroyed. The hotel room was relentlessly beige. Beige walls, beige carpet, beige curtains. It was a perfectly anonymous, soul-crushing room in an airport hotel, the kind of place where careers and marriages came to die. For Mark Thorne, it was the first station of his personal hell. He sat on the edge of the bed, his pilot's uniform still on, but now horribly rumpled. The crisp white shirt felt like a straitjacket. The tie, which he'd loosened, felt like a noose. For hours, he just sat there, replaying the scene on the tarmac. Sterling's cold eyes, Dr. Finch's terrifying calm. The weight of his own stupidity was a physical pressure crushing the air from his lungs. It couldn't be real. It had to be a nightmare, a stress dream brought on by a long flight. But the hotel key card on the nightstand and the missed calls from his wife on his phone were stubbornly real. His first instinct was denial, quickly followed by rage. This was an overreaction, a gross miscarriage of justice, all for a stupid joke. A little comment. The man was too sensitive, that was the problem. These people were always looking for something to be offended by. He tried to build the walls of his fortress of ego back up brick by resentful brick. But the walls wouldn't stand. The foundation was gone. He wasn't just some random pilot anymore. He was the pilot who had insulted the owner of the company. The story would be whispered in every FBO from Teterboro to Dubai. He was a pariah. The next morning, the call came from Human Resources. It was a woman named Eleanor. Her voice clipped and devoid of sympathy. She informed him that he was suspended without pay indefinitely. There would be a formal investigation, a 360-degree review of his conduct and performance history. He was instructed not to contact any other Apex or Stratos employees. His corporate accounts were frozen. "A review," Thorne spluttered into the phone, a desperate, blustering anger rising in him. "A review over a comment. This is insane. I have a perfect flight record, 20 years of service." "The review will be thorough, Captain Thorne," Eleanor said, her tone making it clear his title was now merely a courtesy. "It will cover all aspects of your employment. We will be in touch." The line went dead. The thorough review was not an idle threat. Dr. Finch was not a man who did things by halves. His instruction to Sterling had been simple. "I don't want him fired for what he said to me. I want you to find out if this is who he is, if this rot goes deeper. Our company will not tolerate it at any level." So Stratos Global unleashed its corporate auditors and HR investigators. They descended upon Apex Air Charter like wolves. They interviewed flight attendants, ground crew schedulers, and other pilots. They dug into Thorne's expense reports, his flight logs, his peer reviews, everything. And the rot, as Dr. Finch had suspected, went deep. The stories started to trickle out, then flood. A flight attendant who Thorne had called Sweet Cheeks and threatened with a bad report when she objected. A junior pilot of Indian descent, whom Thorne constantly called Apu behind his back. A Muslim co-pilot who Thorne once joked shouldn't be allowed near the controls when flying over sensitive areas. It was a pattern of behavior, a tapestry of petty cruelties and bigoted remarks that he had gotten away with for years because of his seniority and technical skill. People had been afraid to speak up. Now, with the shield of a corporate mandate, they spoke. But the investigation uncovered more than just prejudice. It uncovered greed. The auditors combing through years of Thorne's expense reports found a curious pattern. On layovers in certain cities, Miami, Las Vegas, Geneva, his catering bills were consistently astronomical. far more than any other pilot. A little digging revealed that Thorne had a cozy relationship with specific catering companies. He would approve grossly inflated invoices, and in return he received a kickback paid in cash or to a discreet personal account. It amounted to tens of thousands of dollars a year. They found fudged fuel logs where he would report taking on more fuel than necessary, with the difference being sold off by a corrupt ground services manager at a remote airfield, the profits split between them. It was a small, systematic fraud that over a decade had siphoned over $100,000 from the company. Each discovery was a new nail in his coffin. The initial incident with Dr. Finch was now just the inciting event, the loose thread that, when pulled, caused his entire professional life to unravel. 2 weeks after his suspension, Thorne was summoned to the Stratus Global headquarters in New York. He wasn't met by HR. He was met by Richard Sterling and 2 men from the company's legal department. The meeting was short and brutal. Mark, Sterling began dispensing with the formality of his surname. The investigation is complete. We have dozens of sworn statements regarding your history of harassment and discriminatory behavior. Frankly, it's appalling. It represents a staggering liability to this company, one we should have dealt with years ago. Thorne started to protest, but Sterling held up a hand. Save it, because that's not why we're here today. That's an HR matter. This, he said, sliding a thick folder across the polished table, is a legal matter. Thorne opened the folder. Inside were copies of the inflated invoices, bank statements from his hidden account, and a signed confession from the catering manager in Miami. His face went ashen. The board has reviewed the evidence of systemic fraud you have perpetrated against this company for the better part of a decade, the lawyer said, his voice flat. We have 2 options. Option 1, we terminate your employment for cause. We report our findings to the FAA, which will result in the permanent revocation of your pilot's license, and we turn this file over to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution. Thorne felt the room spin. Criminal prosecution, jail. What's option 2? He whispered. Option 2, Sterling said, leaning forward. You resign effective immediately. You sign a non-disclosure agreement so airtight you won't be able to say the word Stratus for the rest of your life. You forfeit your entire pension and severance. And you sign this confession and a legally binding repayment plan for $250,000 covering what you stole and our investigative costs. If you do that, the company will consider the matter closed and will not pursue criminal charges. It wasn't a choice. It was a death sentence with the option of a quick burial. With a hand that shook so badly he could barely hold the pen, Mark Thorne signed away his career, his reputation, and his financial future. He walked out of the Stratus Global building, a broken man, the roar of New York City traffic sounding like the jeers of a hostile crowd. The grounding was no longer temporary. It was permanent. He was done. The thing about falling from a great height is that you don't stop when you hit the ground. You shatter. Mark Thorne's life didn't just change, it disintegrated. The initial blow of losing his job was just the beginning. The real karma. The hard, grinding, relentless karma came in the days and months that followed. First, the industry turned its back on him. The world of private aviation is surprisingly small. While Stratus Global agreed not to press charges, the terms of his resignation leaked. Word of the financial misconduct spread like wildfire through the tight-knit community of pilots, brokers, and FBO managers. The initial story of him insulting a passenger was bad enough. It painted him as an idiot. The story of him being a petty thief painted him as a pariah. He sent out over 50 applications to other charter companies. FlexJet, NetJets, VistaJet, all the big names. He applied to smaller regional operators. He even applied for cargo pilot positions. He received 2 responses. Both were polite, single-sentence rejections. His name was toxic. No one would trust him in the cockpit of a multi-million-dollar asset again. His 20 years of flight experience were now worthless, overshadowed by a single catastrophic failure of character. Next, his financial world imploded. Thorne had lived a life commensurate with a top-tier private pilot's salary, a salary that was now gone. He had a $1.2 million mortgage on a sprawling house in a wealthy Connecticut suburb. He had lease payments on 2 luxury cars, a BMW for him, a Mercedes for his wife Brenda. There were country club dues, tuition for his son's private school, and credit card bills that reflected a life of expensive dinners and lavish vacations. And then there was the repayment plan to Stratus Global, $250,000. It was an anchor chained to his ankle. He and Brenda had a furious, soul-bearing fight. He tried to downplay it, to blame Finch, to blame the company, to blame everyone but himself. But Brenda wasn't stupid. She had married him for the status, the security, the captain's wife lifestyle. Now all that was gone, replaced by debt and disgrace. "You didn't just lose your job, Mark," she screamed, her face contorted with rage and disappointment. "You torched our entire life. For what? Because you couldn't resist being a bigoted jerk for 5 minutes. And stealing! You were stealing from them. My God, who are you?" The life raft of their marriage, already leaky, finally sank. Brenda took their son and moved in with her sister. Lawyers were called. The house went on the market in a fire sale. Thorne was forced to sell the BMW at a loss to make the first repayment installment. He moved into a small, depressing apartment complex by the interstate, the kind of place he used to fly over at 40,000 feet, without a second thought. His friends from the country club stopped returning his calls. The invitations to golf outings and barbecues dried up. He was no longer Captain Thorne, the globe-trotting aviator with fascinating stories. He was Mark Thorne, the disgraced pilot who got what he deserved. The isolation was a punishment as profound as the financial ruin. Months passed. The seasons changed. Thorne's savings dwindled to nothing. Desperate, he swallowed his pride and started looking for any work he could find. His pilot's license was under FAA review and effectively useless. He had no other marketable skills. He was in his late 40s, an expensive, overqualified man with a black mark on his record. He eventually found a job. It was a graveyard shift, working as a dispatcher for a regional trucking company. The office was a cramped, fluorescent-lit trailer, smelling of stale coffee and desperation. Instead of guiding a G650ER through the skies of Europe, he now sat in front of a flickering monitor tracking 18-wheelers on I-95. His new boss was a man half his age with a pierced eyebrow. His colleagues were grizzled, world-weary truckers. They spoke in plain, direct language. There were no sirs, no epaulets, no deference. He was just Mark. One night, a driver called in a man with a thick southern drawl. "Hey, Mark, this is Earl. Dispatch, I got a situation down here near Richmond. My alternator's shot. Gonna need a tow and a relay driver for this load." Thorne, tired and bitter, snapped back. "Can you try speaking English, Earl? I can barely understand a word you're saying." There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. Then Earl's voice came back low and dangerous. "Listen to me, you condescending son of a bitch. I'm broken down on the side of the highway at 3 a.m. You're in a warm office. You work for me right now. So you're going to understand me, and you're going to get me some help, or I'm going to call your boss and make sure you're out on the street by sunrise. Do we have an understanding?" The words hit Thorne like a physical blow. It was the echo of his own downfall, the same arrogance, the same condescension. But this time he was on the receiving end. He was powerless, humbled, defeated. "Yes, Earl," Thorne said, his voice barely a whisper. "I understand. I'm sending help now." As he made the call, he stared out the trailer window. High above the navigation lights of a private jet blinked silently as it sliced through the night sky. It was probably a Gulf Stream, maybe even one from the Stratus fleet, a machine he once commanded, a world he once owned. The karma wasn't a lightning strike from the heavens. It was this. It was the slow, grinding erosion of his pride. It was the daily humiliation of his new reality. It was being forced to sit in a cheap chair in a cheap office, listening to the rumble of trucks on the highway, a constant reminder of how far and how fast he had fallen. He hadn't just been grounded from flying. He had been grounded from the man he used to be, with no hope of ever taking off again. A year can pass like a day or a lifetime. For Dr. Alistair Finch, it had been a year of relentless, productive motion. He sat at the head of a gleaming obsidian table in the Stratus Global boardroom, a glass-walled perch on the 50th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper. Below him, the city was a breathtaking tapestry of ambition and light, a living grid of human endeavor. It was a view that invited a strategic perspective, a God's-eye vantage that Finch instinctively applied to his businesses. He saw not just buildings, but systems, not just traffic, but logistics. He was chairing the company's annual philanthropic review, an initiative he had personally overhauled. Richard Sterling stood before a holographic display, his usual sharp corporate demeanor softened by a genuine pride. And so the Wings of Opportunity Scholarship, funded by the new company-wide ethics dividend, has already sponsored its first class. 12 aspiring pilots and 6 aviation mechanics from underprivileged backgrounds, Sterling reported. He swiped the display, and a collage of smiling faces appeared. This is Maria Sanchez from the Bronx. Her father was a baggage handler at JFK for 30 years, and he never thought he'd see the day his daughter would be training to fly a G650. Her progress is exceptional. Dr. Finch allowed himself a small, genuine smile, studying the young woman's determined face. This was the point. This was the antidote to the poison. "That's wonderful news, Richard. Truly." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze intensifying. "And the new mandatory Dignity and Respect in the Workplace training module. What's the feedback from the ground level, not the executive summaries, the chatter in the crew lounges?" Sterling nodded, appreciating the distinction. The rollout was met with some initial cynicism, as expected, but it's become a genuine tool. The culture shift is real. Junior staff, flight attendants, ground crew, they feel empowered to report microaggressions and unprofessionalism without fear of reprisal. We've seen a 20% increase in internal reporting, but a 40% decrease in formal complaints. We're solving problems before they fester. It's a better company, Alistair, a stronger one. The incident with Mark Thorne had become a catalyst for profound systemic change. It was now a cautionary tale whispered in every hangar, and FBO owned by Stratos Global, a legend about the billionaire who looked like just another passenger. Dr. Finch hadn't sought a pound of flesh. He had sought a paradigm shift. He had used the ugliness of one man's prejudice not for revenge, but for reform. He had an engineer's mind, and he saw a flaw in the system's code, a bug that allowed arrogance to be mistaken for authority. So he debugged it. Apex Air Charter, once a small, overlooked subsidiary, was now the gold standard for the new corporate culture. Its newest flagship captain, David Chen, was a testament to that. Promoted and mentored directly by the company's top brass, he had flourished. He was flying the London-New York route. At this very moment, a living embodiment of the company's new ethos. Skill is the requirement for entry, but character is the requirement for command. Dr. Finch looked out the window again at the endless stream of planes descending towards the area's airports. He was not a man who dwelled on the past, but the memory of Thorne's sneering face remained a clinical data point in his mind. He felt no lingering anger, only a quiet, somber sense of responsibility. The captain's downfall was a necessary amputation to save the body. The health of the entire organism, the thousands of employees and their families who depended on the integrity of the company, outweighed the fate of one diseased cell. He had used Thorne's failure not as an end, but as the foundation for something better, something that would last. Miles away in the pre-dawn darkness of Connecticut, the shriek of a cheap digital alarm clock ripped Mark Thorne from a fleeting dream of blue skies. 4:30 a.m. The air in his small apartment was stale and cold. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, his back protesting with a familiar ache from the lumpy mattress and the long hours in a cheap office chair. He moved through his morning routine like an automaton. The instant coffee was bitter, a stark contrast to the rich, dark roasts from the private terminals. He pulled on a faded polo shirt bearing the logo of Highway Logistics, its cheap polyester a constant irritating reminder against his skin. He remembered the feel of a crisp, tailored pilot's shirt, the satisfying weight of the epaulets on his shoulders. That man was a stranger to him now, a ghost from another life. The drive to work was a descent into a gray purgatory of industrial parks and empty highways. He guided his beat-up Honda Civic, its engine rattling through a world he used to soar over without a thought. Then he heard it. It wasn't the guttural rumble of a semi-trailer or the whine of a distant siren. It was a clean, cutting sound, high and pure, the sound of power and grace. His head snapped up an involuntary reflex ingrained by 2 decades of habit. There it was, a phantom carved from moonlight and speed, its navigation lights blinking a steady, rhythmic pulse against the lightening sky. A sleek, white, private jet, its distinctive oval windows unmistakable even from this distance. A Gulf Stream. It was on its final approach to Teterboro. He pulled the car over onto the gravel shoulder, the engine idling roughly. He just watched. The pilot inside him, the one part of him that hadn't died, was still active. He calculated its altitude, its descent rate, its probable glide path. He could almost feel the controls in his hands, the subtle feedback of the air over the wings. For a breathtaking moment, he remembered the feeling, not just the power, but the serenity of the cockpit, the view of the curved earth, the sense of being the master of a perfect machine, a king in a kingdom of clouds. The memory was so vivid, it was physically painful. It was followed by the cold, crushing wave of his reality. The anger, the white-hot rage that had consumed him for months was long gone. It had burned itself out, leaving behind only the cold, heavy ashes of regret. He saw the plane not as an object of envy, but as a perfect, soaring monument to his own colossal stupidity. He had spent his life mastering the complexities of aerodynamics, meteorology, and navigation. He could land a 60-ton aircraft on a wet runway in a crosswind. But he had never bothered to navigate the simple, treacherous landscape of his own character. He had mistaken his rank for worth his salary for substance. The hard, humbling lesson of the past year crystallized in that single moment, watching the jet disappear behind a line of trees. Skill gets you into the captain's seat. It's what you deserve. But character is what keeps you there. It's who you are. With a final weary sigh, Mark Thorne put the car in drive and pulled back onto the road. He turned away from the sky. The decision was a conscious one, an acceptance. He was a man of the earth now. As he pulled into the cracked asphalt parking lot of the trucking depot, the last faint sound of the jet engines faded, replaced by the familiar grumbling roar of an idling 18-wheeler. He got out of his car, zipped up his thin jacket against the morning chill, and walked towards the fluorescent glow of the trailer. It was time to start another long shift on the ground. That right there is the story of Captain Mark Thorne, a man who had it all and lost it, not in a storm or a mechanical failure, but in a single ugly moment of prejudice. It's a powerful reminder that in our interconnected world, there are no small actions. Pride and prejudice have a price, and sometimes that bill comes due in the most spectacular way. The world of private jets, a symbol of ultimate freedom, became a cage for one man brought down by the quiet dignity of another. Character, as Dr. Finch proved, is the true currency of power. What do you think? Was this a justified downfall or a corporate overreaction? Let us know in the comments below. If you believe karma served justice in this story, hit that like button. If you know someone who needs to hear a story about consequences, share this video with them. And most importantly, if you want more true-to-life stories where arrogance meets its match, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. We've got a lot more flights of fancy and falls from grace to share with you.